Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining another API Management Community webcast. Today we're going to be going over Rapid App Security, which is the integration between CA Advanced Authentication and CA Mobile API Gateway. On the phone today we have Brian Nobbe and Carol Alexander. They're going to be walking you through the presentation today. If you have any questions as we're going through the presentation, you can feel free to put those into the Q&A box. You can find that in the right-hand panel of your WebEx screen. If you don't see it maximized, you can click on the blue box with the question mark in it at the top right of your WebEx screen, and that'll maximize the Q&A box. You can put any of your questions that you have in there, and then we'll get to them at the end of the session today. Also, at the end of the session, we'll be doing a short poll. If you could let us know what you thought of the topic today, it'll really help us when scheduling out future sessions for the rest of the year. Okay, so I think we're ready to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn the call over to Carol now. Carol, you can take it away.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone on the call, and thanks for joining us. Today we're going to cover, like Melanie said, Rapid App Security. And, you know, the topic I have here is really the gist of the value of the solution, securing users, apps, and data at the pace of innovation. We've already been introduced a little bit, but I'm Carol Alexander. I cover the access management, single sign-on, advanced auth, and our payment security solutions in fraud and risk. And I'm going to have Brian introduce himself.
Yes, thank you, Carol. Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Nobbe, and I'm a senior principal consultant with the CA API Management pre-sales organization. I'm happy to be here today to talk with Carol around the Rapid App Security solution.
Okay. So what we're going to cover today, I want to take a look at the factors driving digital app development. I don't think they're going to be a surprise to anyone, but some of the stats are pretty impressive. We'll talk about the challenges, the risks, the complexity of how we have to operate to achieve our goals. We'll cover the product itself and some use cases, and then we'll do Q&A. I'll be doing the first couple of parts, and Brian will take over when we get to the description and the how it works of Rapid App Security. Okay. You know, I know we all know that digital interactions are the way of today and of the future, but this statistic really blew me away. 2/3 of the world's population are connected by mobile devices, and that's expected to be, by 2020, almost 75% of the world. And that's 5 billion unique mobile subscribers. And we all wonder why we're scrambling to deliver a perfect mobile app experience. And this is really the crux of why we're changing the way we do business today. You know, as a matter of fact, this picture, I like to say this picture is very accurate. Is there anyone that you see that doesn't have a phone glued to their hand? And furthermore, 68% of users we found will abandon an app or brand after less than 6 seconds of delay. We have become so impatient as a world because of our mobile devices that we cannot stand any inconvenience. And 83% of the people surveyed said that the experience is more important than the product or service itself. So we know that folks are interacting with apps while they're walking down the street and while they're eating dinner. And if they don't have a great experience, they're going to jump to the competition. So the crux of our issue is 5 billion users and no patience. So what is today's reality? Given this pressure to deliver, customers want a fast, reliable service delivered through applications, basically through any channel. So they want to be able to have the same experience no matter where they're coming from, no matter where they are in the world, no matter what device they're using. Us, in the enterprises, we have to satisfy the demand and capture that market share. And that really affects our app development life cycle. So we have to get apps to market faster. We have to get new features to market faster, or we're going to lose ground. And this demand is really all about how do we achieve revenue goals. And then finally, the whole digital experience has to be secure, because no matter what happens, if one breach occurs or my account is hacked, I'm not going to trust you anymore. So I will go to the competition. And so having that relationship between the user, device, and app, and understanding that you have the right person on the right device using the right app is the most important thing you can do for securing, not only securing the experience, but providing a frictionless experience for legitimate users. So that really does translate into our software development challenges. There are three main obstacles that we have to overcome. Those are convenience, velocity, and that refers to the developer, and security. So when we're thinking about building or buying a solution, we need to decide, is it secure enough to meet all of my compliance requirements? Does it improve my developer velocity? So if it doesn't do that, it's not helping me deliver that beautiful, wonderful, perfect digital experience to my customers, because I have to do it quickly. And that has to come, the value has to come without a high cost to develop operator support. And then finally, we have to ensure that our users trust us, that they trust that their apps, their device, and the communications between them are safe. So let's take a look at some of the risks that we do face. And those are really encapsulated in fraud, theft, and data privacy risks. So, it is a heavy lift to choose and build the type of authentication required. And what that means is I have to really figure out the balance between a high-value client interacting with me and the risk that this is not the genuine user. So you have to decide, how much am I willing to authenticate them with maybe a more heavy authentication type, or, can I let them go through in a frictionless manner? There's also the potential to expose sensitive customer information if, for instance, the communication between the device and the back-end systems are compromised. And there are many points of exposure. So it's so important to identify the legitimacy of the person. And I emphasize that because we're going to talk a little bit about contextual and risk-based authentication, and that's a methodology that allows us to do that. There's a possibility of a compromised device, and of course there's a possibilities that the session might be hijacked, my account credentials may have been stolen, so I may be, my account may have been hacked, and so I have to be able to detect that. So all of this has to happen without disrupting legitimate users, because we know that that's, we always have to remember our primary goal is business, completing our business transaction, whatever that might be, and we have to allow our legitimate users to do that. Okay, the other components that we have to think about, or the decision that we have to make, is, do we build this in-house? I've got an authentication solution. I may have a gateway solution, but what are the costs and the complexity of building that in-house? So first of all, they may not all be from the same vendor, and even if they are, they may not be integrated. So you have to think about the gateway product, the authentication product, and the SDKs. You have to determine the authentication requirements. Are you going to use contextual authentication? Do you want to use biometric? Do you need two-factor? So for each point in an app where either you're signing into the app or whether you're conducting a transaction, decisions have to be made about whether you want to authenticate that transaction or secure that transaction in some way. You have to make sure that you apply this across all apps and channels, because from a point of view of a customer, they want to be known as one individual, and you have to treat them that way. So you have to find a way to give them the same experience no matter what channel they're on. Of course, you have to comply with the security regulations, and often when you have multiple products and multiple vendors, you're going to have to integrate multiple SDKs into the app. You have to, all of this leads up to starting, coding the authentication into the app, and then, in essence, you have to start all over again. What if you want to upgrade one of the components? You have to retest the entire architecture. So it's something to think about how complex it is to build this solution. And frankly, do you have the time or security expertise to make this happen, given the pressure of getting these apps and features to market quickly? So that's where, of course, CA Rapid App Security comes in. It really is a comprehensive authentication solution for mobile, web, and IoT. There are several capabilities that it provides: robust authentication, including contextual and risk-based authentication, and fraud detection. It has a simplified app developer interaction so that your developers don't really have to know security to use it. It establishes three-way trust and provides fast and convenient and frictionless access so that your customers have a good experience with your app. So before we launch into a little bit about what Rapid App Security is, I wanted to cover this business value estimator that we created. We did this for a particular customer, and then we generalized it. And we looked at the areas where you will either save money or you will reduce cost. Basically, the business value proposition of the first section is improving the application developer staff productivity. And what we did is we made an estimate, and this is based on a $1 billion size of an organization. And we made an estimate of how we could reduce the security developer resource time. And that translated into about $150,000 savings. We looked at the improved security compliance and productivity, which translated into about $140K savings, and then increased profitability due to fraud prevention. So what this does is it reduces your fraud losses. It also improves the costs associated with managing fraud loss and managing fraudulent transactions. So you can see that's the significant savings that you have in employing this kind of a solution. So about $1.2 million in savings there. And finally, because you are not denying legitimate customers access to the app, or because you're not, you're allowing them to conduct business, they will naturally do more transactions with you. That results in about $500,000 worth of savings. So for a $1 billion company, if you take a look at these, and we can actually help you go through this for your own organization, but in this case, we had a sample of nearly $2 million in savings. So happy to answer questions about that at the end of the session here. But now I'm going to turn it over to Brian to give you some more information on Rapid App Security.
Thank you, Carol. I appreciate that, and it's a great overview of the, making sure to understand the challenges that customers are facing and some of the background reasons why that CA has created the Rapid App solution. So let's take a little bit deeper look now into what the solution looks like, what are the main components, and walk through how. What I'd like to point out here, obviously this is a logical diagram, but point out how these different components talk to the value of the solution that Carol outlined a couple slides ago. So as you can see, going from left to right, the solution is comprised of essentially three main components, and that is a universal SDK that can be rolled into and used inside of for mobile development applications, an authentication gateway, as well as then authentication and risk services. Okay, and and going from left to right, if you look at the different modalities that are shown that are available to a developer using the SDK, this really allows them to use simple libraries to implement complex security patterns and provide robust risk and authentication services in their mobile apps. As we mentioned earlier, not having to actually become security experts to do so. The authentication gateway has a couple different roles in this solution, and they're pretty powerful. One is that it provides a place for policy administrators to enforce and orchestrate policy across all the different channels. And that policy, it can use a wide variety of back-end systems, so it fits very nicely and integrates nicely into existing enterprises, and uses those for both identity as well as different type of data stores, invoking different types of APIs, and the security orchestrator has the ability to create those policies in that gateway, which reduces the amount of mobile app development changes needed when conditions change. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then the gateway also has a pre-developed set of APIs that are loaded that the SDKs are paired with. So the developer just has to understand the library. He calls the library understands which APIs on the gateway to call at which points. And finally, the gateway plays a very crucial role in assuring that three-way trust that Carol described earlier. So ensuring that we're monitoring the user's devices, their applications, and keeping that trust monitored the entire time the user is using their applications on the devices. And this allows also to provide that more low friction experience for allowing things like mobile single sign-on. So I've got two different apps. I've signed into one. The corporation says if you're signed into this one, you can also open up this one. And voila, I open up that other app without having to log in or provide any credentials again. So those are some of the key functions provided by the authentication gateway. And then finally, the authentication and risk services are provided as essentially APIs through that authentication gateway. So very robust and complex and sophisticated rules can be developed in the risk engine so that the end user behavior is constantly monitored, right? So if there's some type of a risk during authentication or even during regular transaction processing, those types of events can be detected so that if it appears a user is doing something abnormal, then we could potentially use the authentication services that are provided to start doing things like step up or force them to use a stronger token or even invoke a biometrics type of flow. So all of those types of services can be made available to essentially the security professionals so that they can configure those policies and change the behavior of the way that the services work or the risk scores and things like that. And all that can happen without the mobile app ever needing to be deployed. So that's a pretty strong capability of being able to provide that, and again, sort of speeds up the entire process from a velocity perspective. Now let's take a look at these a little bit closer. So if we talk about the SDK, the whole concept here, the universal SDK, is that it provides a lot of flexibility, and you can think of it as providing essentially the app developer a toolbox for security, right? They're not having to develop all that code or logic themselves. They have many types of modalities available to them. Because the SDK libraries are paired with preloaded services on the gateway, this leaves them from having to develop that complex interaction code. They just call the library takes care of the back and forth along with the gateway. And then the other benefit of this is allowing leaving the responsibility of which pattern to use to security policy authors or administrators. So depending on the type of service that's being exposed or through to the mobile app, they can choose what type of policy and modalities and or step-up processing that needs to happen. The developer just implements those with SDK calls in their mobile app. So simplifying the whole process and again, improving velocity of the whole end-to-end flow. And here is where we really start to get to, from a power perspective, a powerful concept here is bringing contextual authentication and making it very versatile to use. Because a lot of folks, you've heard some of the discussions around moving to a passwordless world, right? And in order to do that, you need to leverage a solution that can actually learn a user's behavior. That's what we've been talking about from a risk perspective. Passwords, tokens, devices, those can be stolen, right? But the hardest thing that an attacker can do is exactly mimic a user's behavior, because they're either not in the same place or they don't know that type of behavior. There's many different reasons why an attacker can't mimic behavior. So the whole idea is providing this contextual risk-based types of authentication and transaction monitoring so that any deviation from a user's normal behavior is detected, right? And that's where the risk services come into play, and having the ability to configure those risk rules, make them very powerful and sophisticated. Many different types of information components can be passed to those risk rules. All the device DNA of the current device that's making the API call can be used. So there's many different options there to how to build those risk rules. And then, obviously being able to pair those services with simple APIs, right? So that all of the complexity is taken out of the equation by having those SDK paired with the APIs that are actually exposing these types of services to the mobile app developer. Now, this essentially in the end, there's, the capabilities that we've been talking about bring some good value to both you as an organization, your customers, and as well as the developers inside of your organization. I just want to hit on those a little bit. So we've already, we've seen this what's called the either triangular trust or three-way trust. This is the whole idea of monitoring users, which users are using which apps on which devices, right? Monitoring that, keeping that monitored as their sessions proceed, but then also the key thing here is making sure to use open standards, both OAuth, OpenID, PKI infrastructure type standards, so that we're not reinventing the wheel. We're using standards that are well known, well trusted throughout the industry. Establishing those three-way trusts, and then the last item there is really what it comes down to is elevating that authentication if a pattern deviates from norm. That's the whole idea of trying to detect that this user potentially is doing something that they're not normally doing. That brings some great value to the business by allowing them to expose higher value services with strong security. And then as as Carol discussed earlier, making sure the customer essentially has a great experience so that they have the data they want on the devices they want through the channel they want, but they're not being burdened by a heavy friction or a heavy cumbersome security experience. So keeping the customer experience great, but while also, you know to yourself as an organization, you're keeping your services secure, which brings some, some good elevating your brand with the customers and keeping all their information secure and private. And finally, basically bringing value to the developer. It truly is, allowing the SDK by having the developers leverage the SDK. It really truly does getting the developers onto the task that they like the most, which is writing their application, creating the cool interfaces, the business logic, things like that. They're not trying to figure out security or how to become a security expert in order to use the security mechanisms that they need to so that they have a secure app. So they know it's important to do that. This frees them up, as this diagram shows. The lines at the top and the bottom are basically the call to the library and the return from the library in the SDK, and all of the other back-end sequencing that's happening here shown. This is a real example. It's all being taken care of by the combination of the SDK and the authentication gateway. And finally, there's many different types of use cases that could be discussed. There's hopefully, no matter which vertical that you are a part of, some of these use cases will ring true to you as far as being able to leverage the Rapid App Security solution to bring a better end-user experience for any of these types of verticals and or use cases. So for example, here we picked one sample example is just improving customer expectations. So, allowing, for example, you have a mobile, you have a banking application and an account, and your kid, determines that, decides he needs some extra cash. Being able to essentially to authenticate them, to open up an app and get a secure token, and then entering that token into the ATM so that they can actually retrieve cash from your account without having to actually have their card in their possession, right? But ensuring that, the right device was being used, the authentication, the authorization to those services was properly provided, using that secure token, all of that being done through an interaction between and provided for by the Rapid App Security solution. So, and that's all I had. Just one last note, and we'll go to the Q&A, is that we are starting to also going to be having some in-person or events around that folks can or will be probably, if they're interested in going to, we'll dive deeper into the solution as well as providing a fairly thorough demonstration of the capabilities of the solution in action. So be on the lookout for information around these, or get a hold of folks in the sales organization if you're interested in attending some of these. And that's all I had. Melanie?
Okay, so just a reminder, if you have any questions, now's the time when you can go ahead and ask those. We do have the Q&A box where you can type in any questions that you have. We'll be monitoring that, and let's give it a second to see any questions that come in. Okay. If there are no questions, and I think we're okay to go ahead and close out for today. Just a reminder, if you do think of any questions later on, you can feel free to enter those into the API management community. We have experts that are constantly monitoring that space to make sure that you get answers to your questions quickly. So that's a good resource to use following this session. We also do have several roadmap sessions coming up for the API management product set. You can check those out by heading to ca.com/roadmaps and registering for any session that you'd like to join out of those options. we also post them to the community as well. We're also working on a monthly webcast schedule, so sessions similar to this will be coming out on a monthly cadence. We'll be posting those to the community, so keep an eye on the API management community for those. I've also launched that poll that I mentioned earlier in the webcast. If you could please let us know what you thought of the topic today, that would be very helpful when we plan out those future monthly sessions. Other than that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you to Brian and Carol for a great presentation today. We'll be posting the recording and the slides with of this session to the API management community later today, so keep an eye out for that. And otherwise, thank you very much. We hope to see you on a future session or out in the communities. Have a great day, everyone.
So I was complaining about my canceled behavior I was talking about. Yeah, man. I wasn't even paying attention, number one, to like how many people were online. So do we have any customers actually attending that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Training. Right? Yeah. No. Yeah. Nope. Nope. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll take what I'll do is I want to get feedback. I know that I started to crack a couple times, and that's because I went off script, and I reminded myself multiple times. I've got a bullet point, not a talking